The neutral station floated in the darkness between territories, a small dot of light in the empty space where no one claimed ownership. Inside, 40 different species gathered in the grand negotiation hall, and every single one of them expected failure. Ambassador Elena Vasquez rubbed her tired eyes as her shuttle docked. She had been awake for 36 hours straight, jumping from one emergency meeting to another. Her dark hair was falling out of its bun, and her formal diplomatic coat had a coffee stain on the sleeve. She grabbed her bag and the large thermal container she had brought from Earth, then hurried toward the entrance. The Craxian war fleet waited just outside the station's windows. 1,200 ships, each one bigger than Earth's largest city. They had been there for 3 months, blockading the independent colonies of the Verdant Rim. The colonies were small, peaceful worlds where families grew food and raised children. They had no armies. They had no warships. All they had was the hope that someone would stop the Craxians from taking everything they owned. Inside the hall, High Sovereign Thraxul stood with his warriors. He was massive, even for a Craxian. His forearms were covered in battle scars, and his compound eyes reflected the light like black diamonds. His exoskeleton was decorated with marks of conquest, each one representing a world his fleet had taken. There were hundreds of them. The Craxians did not sit. They did not make small talk. They stood in perfect formation, not moving, not speaking. They had been standing like that for 4 hours, waiting for the summit to begin. To them, showing tiredness or discomfort was weakness. Weakness was unacceptable. Other delegates whispered nervously in small groups. The Quill Collective, bird-like creatures with silver feathers, had organized this summit. They were neutral mediators respected throughout the galaxy. But even they looked worried. This was the 5th summit in 3 months. The previous 4 had ended with the Craxians walking out. A delegate from the Verdant Rim colonies, a small insect-like being named Chitara, stood near the window. She was looking at her homeworld on a display screen. Her children were down there. If this summit failed, the Craxians would invade within days. Her hands shook. The Earth delegation was small. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 20 years ago. They were still learning how things worked. Most species considered them insignificant, not because they were hostile, but because they were simply too new, too small, too weak to matter in the big conflicts. Elena finally arrived at the hall entrance. She was late. The security guard, a massive rock-like being from Granite Prime, looked down at her with disapproval. Ambassador Vasquez, the ceremony begins in 5 minutes. I know, sorry, traffic. Elena smiled tiredly. There was no traffic in space, but the guard did not smile back. She walked into the hall and conversation stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. She was carrying a large silver container that looked out of place among the formal diplomatic equipment. It had flowers painted on the side. The Craxian warriors noticed her immediately. Thraxul's eyes tracked her movement across the hall. He saw her wrinkled coat, her messy hair, her casual way of setting down her container in a corner. To him, it looked like disrespect. Humans, he thought, did not understand the seriousness of war. Elena did not notice his stare. She was too busy finding an outlet to plug in her container's heating element. She wanted to keep the contents warm. The ceremony began. Plurality of 9, the Quill Collective mediator, spread their silver wings and spoke in a voice that translated into every language simultaneously. We gather here in hope of peace. The Craxian Dominion has presented demands. The Verdant Rim colonies have responded. We are here to find a path forward that prevents bloodshed. It was a nice speech. Everyone had heard versions of it 4 times before. Thraxul stepped forward. When he moved, the floor vibrated slightly under his weight. His voice was deep and hard, like stones grinding together. The Craxian Dominion does not negotiate from weakness. The Verdant Rim exists in territory we require. We have offered them the honor of joining our empire peacefully. They have refused. This is their final opportunity to accept our terms. Chitara, the small delegate from the colonies, stood up. Her voice was quiet but steady. We are peaceful people. We harm no one. We only ask to be left alone. The galaxy does not reward the weak with peace, Thraxul replied. It rewards them with conquest. We offer you survival. You should be grateful. That is not survival. That is slavery. Thraxul's mandibles clicked together, a sound that meant dismissal. You use that word as if it matters. Strength matters. Power matters. Everything else is emotion, and emotion is weakness. Several delegates began standing up, preparing to leave. This was how the last 4 summits had ended. The Craxians stated their terms. Someone objected. The Craxians declared emotions irrelevant. Everyone went home. And the Warfleet stayed in position. Plurality of 9 called for a recess, hoping to calm everyone down before the summit collapsed completely. Delegates scattered into small groups, talking urgently. The Craxian warriors remained in formation, unmoving. They had not eaten in 12 hours. They would not eat until their duty shift ended in another 6. This was normal for them. Elena opened her thermal container. The smell that emerged was immediate and powerful. It filled the recycled air of the station with something the environmental systems had never processed before. Rich, warm, complex. The smell of chicken soup made from her grandmother's recipe, with vegetables from her small garden on Earth, herbs she had dried herself, and noodles she had rolled by hand the night before. She had made it because she knew she would be tired. She had made extra because she thought other people might be tired too. It was a simple thought. A human thought. She pulled out a stack of disposable bowls and a ladle. She poured herself a bowl and took a sip. Perfect. The warmth spread through her chest, and for the first time in 36 hours, she felt a little bit better. A young Craxian warrior named Kelxer stood 10 feet away. He had been standing at attention for 4 hours and would stand for 6 more. He was trained to ignore discomfort, but he had never smelled anything like that before. In his entire life, he had only eaten nutrition paste. Efficient, balanced, tasteless. That was the Craxian way. His eyes kept drifting toward the human with her strange container. She looked up and saw him staring. She smiled. "Would you like some? I made way too much." Kelixar did not know what to say. Craxians did not accept offerings from other species. It implied debt, but something about the smell made his mandibles twitch involuntarily. Thraxul was across the room, speaking with another commander. Kelixar glanced at his High Sovereign, then back at the human holding out a bowl. "It is just soup," Elena said gently. "You have been standing there for hours. You must be hungry, hungry." The Craxians had a word for that, but it meant something different to them. It meant fuel levels were low. It did not mean this strange pull toward the warm liquid in the bowl. Kelixar reached out and took the bowl. His massive hand made it look tiny. He brought it to his mouth and tasted. For a moment, nothing else existed. The flavor exploded across his sensory receptors. Salt, herbs. The rich depth of broth made from bones simmered for hours. Vegetables that tasted like sunshine and soil. It was warm. It was complex. It was kind. He made a sound. A small involuntary sound of surprise and wonder. Every Craxian in the hall turned to look at him. Warriors did not make sounds like that. Warriors did not show reaction. But Kelixar stood there, holding his bowl, looking at it like it held secrets to the universe. One by one, other Craxian warriors began moving toward the human ambassador. Elena, completely unaware that she was doing anything unusual, simply ladled out more bowls. She smiled at each warrior who approached. She told them to be careful because it was hot. She asked if they wanted more when they finished. Thraxul watched his entire warrior formation break apart to stand in line for soup from a human half their size. His 4 hands clenched into fists. This was not protocol. This was not acceptable. But then he saw their faces. His warriors, trained from hatching to show no emotion, were looking at their bowls with something that terrified him more than any weapon. They looked grateful. The summit resumed 20 minutes later, but everything had changed in ways no one yet understood. The Craxian warriors kept glancing at Elena. Thraxul stood rigid, watching his soldiers, seeing something in them he had never seen before. It was confusion, but underneath the confusion was a question that would shatter an empire. If soup could feel like this, what else had they been missing? The summit hall felt different when the session resumed. The delegates took their seats, but the Craxian warriors were not standing in their usual perfect formation. They were close together, whispering. Craxians never whispered during official proceedings. High Sovereign Thraxul stood at the head of his delegation, watching his warriors with growing concern. Something had broken in their discipline. Something small. Something dangerous. Plurality of 9 began speaking again, trying to move the negotiations forward. They proposed a compromise where the verdant rim colonies would pay tribute to the Craxian Dominion, but maintain their independence. It was the same proposal from the last 3 summits. Thraxul barely listened. His attention was on Kelixar, his youngest officer. The warrior was staring at his empty bowl, which he had kept instead of disposing of it. This was not normal behavior. Warriors did not form attachments to objects. Warriors did not get distracted during critical negotiations. Chitara was speaking now, her small voice amplified by the translation system. We will not pay tribute to an empire that threatens to destroy us. That is not tribute, that is extortion. Thraxul should have responded with force. He should have reminded everyone in the room that his fleet could turn their worlds to ash. That was how negotiations worked when you held absolute military power. But instead he found himself thinking about soup. It was absurd. It was beneath him. Yet he could not stop thinking about the way his warriors had reacted. They were not trained to respond to food that way. Food was fuel. You consumed it efficiently and moved on. But they had stood in line. They had waited. They had made sounds of pleasure. Pleasure. The Craxians had eliminated that word from their military vocabulary 3,000 years ago. Pleasure was inefficient. Pleasure made soldiers weak. High Sovereign? One of his commanders was looking at him, waiting for his response to something Chitara had said. Thraxul realized he had missed part of the conversation. He who had commanded fleets in 17 major campaigns, who had never once lost focus during a negotiation, had been thinking about soup while an inferior species challenged his authority. We will recess, he announced abruptly. My delegation requires private consultation. The other delegates looked surprised. It was only 2 hours into the session, but no one argued with a Craxian High Sovereign, especially one who commanded 1,200 warships. The Craxian warriors filed out of the hall in formation, though it was not as precise as usual. They boarded their shuttle back to the flagship. No one spoke during the journey. Speaking out of turn was forbidden. But the silence felt different than normal. It felt full of questions no one knew how to ask. The flagship was called the Inevitable. It was 5 miles long and carried enough weapons to crack a planet's crust. Thraxul had lived on this ship for 30 years. It was efficient. It was powerful. It was home. They gathered in the war room, a circular chamber with screens showing tactical data. Thraxul dismissed the guards and sealed the door. Only his core command staff remained. 15 warriors who had served with him for decades. Explain, Thraxul said. His voice was cold and controlled, but underneath was something none of them had heard before. Confusion. The warriors looked at each other. Finally, Kelixar stepped forward. He was young, only 40 years old. He had only conquered 3 worlds, but he was brave enough to speak first. High Sovereign, the human gave us soup. I am aware. That does not explain why my entire command structure broke formation to accept food from an inferior species. It was not just food, Kelixar said quietly. It was different. Different how? Food is fuel. Nutrition is nutrition. Another warrior, a female named Thraxula who had served for 70 years, spoke up. High Sovereign, permission to speak freely? Thraxul clicked his mandibles in assent. This was already irregular. They might as well continue being irregular. The soup was warm, Thraxula said, not temperature warm. I do not have words for it. It made me feel something I have never felt before. What feeling? She struggled to find the word. Their language was designed for warfare and efficiency. It had precise terms for 17 different types of tactical advantage. But it did not have a word for what she was trying to describe. Safe, she finally said. It made me feel safe. The room went silent. Safe was not a feeling warriors were supposed to have. Warriors were supposed to make others feel unsafe. That was their purpose. Thraxul pulled up data on his personal screen. He accessed the Dominion's intelligence files on humanity. They had been studying Earth for 20 years, ever since humans had achieved faster-than-light travel. The file was extensive. Humans were weak militarily. Their technology was basic. Their worlds were poorly defended. They should have been easy to conquer. But the Dominion had not bothered because humans controlled no strategic resources and posed no threat. Thraxul read through the cultural analysis section. He had never paid attention to it before. Military capabilities were what mattered. But now he read it carefully. Humans spent enormous resources on cuisine. They had entire buildings called restaurants, where they paid others to prepare food for them. They wrote books about food. They made entertainment programs about food. They spent hours preparing meals when nutrition paste could provide the same fuel in seconds. It was inefficient. It was illogical. But as Thraxul read deeper, he began to see patterns. Humans fed each other, not just for nutrition, but as an act of connection. When humans were sad, they made food for each other. When they celebrated, they made food. When they wanted to show love, they made food. Food was woven into every aspect of their social structure. The Craxians had eliminated that 10,000 years ago. When they had conquered their homeworld and united under the First Dominion, the ancient emperors had declared efficiency to be the highest virtue. Food became standardized. Meals became timed. Taste was engineered out as an unnecessary distraction. It had made them strong. It had made them efficient. It had made them conquerors. But what had they lost? Thraxul looked at his warriors. They were the finest soldiers in the galaxy. They could stand for 20 hours without rest. They could fight in any environment. They feared nothing. But right now, they looked like children who had discovered something they did not have words for. The human. Thraxul said slowly. Ambassador Vasquez, did she give you the soup as a negotiation tactic? Kelxar shook his head. No, High Sovereign. She offered it because she said we looked hungry. She said she had made too much. She smiled when she gave it to me. Not a diplomatic smile, a real smile. Like she was happy to share. Happy to share. Another concept that did not fit in the Craxian worldview. You did not share resources unnecessarily. You allocated them efficiently. Thrixala spoke again. High Sovereign, I accessed more data on human culture during the recess. They have a tradition called hospitality. It means welcoming strangers and caring for their needs. Not because it serves a strategic purpose, just because the stranger has needs. That is irrational. Yes, High Sovereign, but they do it anyway. And when I tasted the soup, I understood something. The human ambassador did not make that soup for negotiation. She made it because she was tired and hungry, and she thought others might be tired and hungry too. She cared about us without knowing us, without us earning it, without strategic value. Thraxul felt something crack in his chest. It was not physical. It was deeper than that. It was the foundation of everything he had believed for his entire life. The Craxians had built an empire on strength. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had crushed every enemy. But a human half his size had brought them to their knees with soup, and she had not even known she was doing it. Pull up the full tactical analysis of Earth, Thraxul ordered. His intelligence officer complied. The screens filled with data. Earth's military capabilities were minimal. Their fleet was tiny. Their weapons were primitive. The Dominion could conquer Earth in less than a week with a single battle group. But then Thraxul saw something else in the data. Humanity had made first contact with 47 different species. Not one of them considered humans an enemy. Not one. In fact, humans had defensive pacts with 12 species who were significantly more powerful than they were. How did you conquer a species that everyone liked? Analysis of human diplomatic strategy, Thraxul demanded. The data appeared, but it was confusing. There was no strategy. Humans did not manipulate. They did not scheme. They just helped other species when asked, expected nothing in return, and apparently made soup for tired people during summits. It was the most dangerous thing Thraxul had ever encountered, precisely because it was not dangerous at all. It was genuine. And the Craxians had no defense against genuine kindness, because they had eliminated it from their own culture so long ago that they did not remember what it looked like. One of his commanders, an old warrior named Grakesh, spoke for the first time. He was 90 years old and had fought in more battles than anyone else in the room. High Sovereign, I have a question that may be considered treasonous. Speak. If we conquer the Verdant Rim colonies tomorrow, what do we gain? Strategic territory, resources, another world for the Dominion. Yes, but what do we gain that we did not have before? Thraxul opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. It was a simple question. But suddenly he did not have an answer. The Dominion Thraxul did not sleep that night. Craxians only needed 4 hours of rest every 3 days, and he was not due for rest. But even if he had been, he did not think sleep would come. He stood in his private quarters aboard the Inevitable, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a small blue world that had produced a species strange enough to make soup for their enemies. His personal terminal chimed. A priority message from the Dominion High Command. They had heard about the disruption at the summit. They wanted to know why he had called a recess. They wanted to know if the humans had used some kind of weapon or chemical agent to affect his troops. Thraxul almost laughed. A weapon, yes, perhaps soup was a weapon, but not the kind the High Command would understand. He did not respond to the message. Instead, he pulled up every file the Dominion had on human culture. He had been a warrior for 75 years. He had studied tactical manuals and weapon specifications. He had never once looked at cultural data. What did culture matter when you had superior firepower? But now he read everything. Humans made art. Not functional art meant to intimidate enemies or display power. Art whose only purpose was beauty. They made music that served no strategic function. They wrote stories about people who did not exist. They spent resources on these things that could have been used for weapons or expansion. It was inefficient. But as Thraxul read deeper, he began to understand. These things were not meant to help humans survive. They were meant to help humans live. And those were not the same thing. The Craxians had perfected survival, but had they forgotten how to live? He found a human text file that had been included in one of the cultural databases. It was titled My Grandmother's Kitchen, by someone named Elena Vasquez. The date was 20 years old. She must have written it when she was young. Thraxul read it slowly, translating the human idioms and references. Elena wrote about learning to cook from her grandmother. She described the small kitchen in Mexico where she grew up. She wrote about how her grandmother would hum while cooking, how she would taste the food and adjust it, how she would make enough for the whole neighborhood because someone might be hungry. The essay was not about food. It was about love. Her grandmother showed love by feeding people. Elena learned that the act of preparing food for someone was the act of saying, I care if you are comfortable. I care if you are happy. Your well-being matters to me. Thraxul read that line 3 times. Your well-being matters to me. When was the last time anyone had said something like that to him? When was the last time he had said it to anyone else? Warriors did not speak of well-being. They spoke of duty and honor and strength. But underneath all of that, was there not supposed to be a reason? They fought to protect the Dominion. But what were they protecting? What did the Dominion have that was worth protecting beyond its own power? He pulled up the files on the Verdant Rim colonies. He had read the military assessments dozens of times. Population 15 million across 3 worlds. Military capability none. Strategic value minimal. They grew food and raised families. They had farms and schools and festivals. Thraxul pulled up visual surveillance from the colonies. He watched civilians going about their lives. A parent teaching a child to plant seeds. Neighbors sharing a meal. A community gathering to celebrate something, music playing, people dancing. It looked so simple, so fragile, and he was going to destroy it because they refused to submit to the Dominion. Why? The question would not leave his mind. His entire life he had never questioned orders. The Dominion conquered because they were strong. The strong dominated the weak. That was the natural order, but was it? Or was it just the order the Craxians had chosen? He pulled up Earth's history. Humans had been violent once. Their history was full of wars and conquest. But something had changed. They had reached a point where they stopped conquering each other and started cooperating instead. They had formed a unified world government not through domination, but through agreement. The Dominion psychologists had studied this. They concluded that humans were naive, that their peace would not last, that eventually they would return to their violent nature. But it had been 300 years since Earth's last war. And in that time, humans had made friends with half the galaxy simply by being helpful and making soup. Thraxul's terminal chimed again. This time it was a private message from Kelixar. The young warrior had sent him a file. It was a human recipe database. The message said, Hi Sovereign, I found this in the cultural archives. I have been reading it for 3 hours. I do not understand why, but I cannot stop. I thought you might want to see it. Thraxul opened the database. It contained thousands of human recipes from dozens of cultures. Each one had instructions, but also stories. Why the dish was important, who usually made it, when it was served, what it meant to the people who ate it. There was a recipe for chicken soup almost identical to what Elena had made. The note said it was called comfort food, and was traditionally made for sick people or sad people or anyone who needed to feel cared for. The Craxians did not have comfort food. They had nutrition paste that came in different formulas depending on your physical requirements. Formula 7 for heavy labor, Formula 12 for combat situations, Formula 3 for standard duty. It was efficient. But now, for the first time in his life, Thraxul wondered if efficiency was overrated. He thought about his warriors standing in line for soup. They were trained to endure any hardship. They could eat nutrition paste for decades without complaint. But given the choice, they had chosen soup. They had chosen warmth and flavor and the feeling of being cared for even by a stranger. What did that say about 10,000 years of Craxian culture? A memory surfaced, old and buried. Thraxul had been very young, maybe 5 years old. Before the military training began, his birth mother had done something unusual. She had spent extra time preparing his nutrition paste, adding something to it. He did not remember what, but he remembered it tasted different, better. And he remembered feeling something warm in his chest when she gave it to him. The next day, a training officer had seen her do it. She was reported for inefficiency. She was reassigned to a labor colony. Thraxul never saw her again, and he learned the lesson. Caring too much was weakness. Love was a luxury the Dominion could not afford. He had carried that lesson for 70 years. But now, holding a bowl that had once contained soup, made by a woman who reminded him of a mother he had barely known, he wondered if that lesson had been a lie. The door chimed. Thraxula requested entry. He granted it. The old warrior entered and stood at attention. But there was something different in her posture. Less rigid, more uncertain. "High Sovereign, I need to tell you something." "Speak." "I have been accessing human cultural files all night. I found something." She hesitated, which was unusual for her. "I found information about Craxian history. From before the First Dominion." Thraxul's eyes sharpened. "That information is classified. Accessing it is forbidden." "Yes, High Sovereign. Court-martial me if you must. But you need to see this." She sent him the file. Thraxul opened it with his command codes. It was an archaeological record from the Dominion Science Division. Marked secret, buried in archives that most Craxians did not even know existed. It showed excavations from ancient Craxian settlements. Before the wars, before the unification, before the Dominion, the ancient Craxians had been different. They had families, not breeding programs. They had homes, not barracks. They had art. They had music. They had ceremonies around food preparation and sharing. They had been like humans. And then the wars came. The clan conflicts. The resource struggles. The strong began to dominate. The first emperor rose to power by being more ruthless than everyone else. He declared that emotions were weaknesses that had caused the wars. He rebuilt Craxian society around efficiency and strength. He eliminated everything that did not serve the military. It worked. The Craxians became the most powerful species in their region of space. They conquered world after world, but they had paid a price Thraxul was only now beginning to understand. They had won everything except the right to be happy. Why was this hidden? Thraxul asked quietly. Because it shows that our way is not the only way, Thraxala said. Because it shows we chose this. And if we chose it, we can choose differently. The High Command would execute us for saying such things. Yes, High Sovereign, they would. But that human woman gave me soup without knowing my name or my rank or whether I was her enemy. She did it because I looked hungry. And in that moment I remembered something I did not know I had lost. What? The feeling of being someone worth caring about. Thraxul closed his eyes. His forehands clenched. Every part of his training told him this was wrong. Warriors did not think like this. Warriors did not question 10,000 years of tradition because of soup, but he was thinking it anyway. And worse, he was starting to believe it. What are you going to do tomorrow? Thraxula asked. At the summit? I am going to do something that will probably get me executed by the High Command. What is that? I am going to tell the truth, Thraxul said. That we have been lying to ourselves for 10,000 years. That... The summit hall filled with delegates again the next morning. Everyone expected the same result as always. The Craxians would make demands. The colonies would refuse. Everyone would go home. And in a few days the war would begin. Elena Vasquez arrived early this time, her hair properly styled and her diplomatic coat clean. She had gotten 4 hours of sleep and felt almost human again. She carried her thermal container, which she had refilled with fresh soup that morning. Several delegates smiled at her. The Quill Collective mediator, plurality of 9, approached with their silver feathers ruffled in curiosity. Ambassador Vasquez, I must ask, the substance you shared yesterday, was that a deliberate diplomatic strategy? Elena looked confused. The soup? No, I just thought people might be hungry. Why, did I break some protocol? On the contrary. I have been mediating interstellar negotiations for 40 years. I have never seen Craxian warriors break formation for anything. You accomplished in 20 minutes what I could not achieve in 5 summits. I just gave them soup. Yes, plurality of 9 said thoughtfully. You just gave them soup. Perhaps that is the point. Elena still looked confused as she set up her container in the same corner as yesterday. Several delegates approached, asking if she had brought more. She smiled and said yes. Within minutes, there was a line forming. Chitara, the small delegate from the Verdant Rim, approached Elena nervously. Ambassador Vasquez, I wanted to thank you. I do not know what you did yesterday, but the Craxians requested this meeting. They have never requested anything before. They only demand. I really did not do anything, Elena said, ladling soup into a bowl for a crystalline being from Prism 7. I brought soup. Sometimes the smallest actions have the largest consequences. The Craxian delegation arrived precisely on time. But something was different. They were not in full military formation. They entered in a looser group, and every single warrior was looking at Elena. Thraxul walked at the front. His forearms were relaxed at his sides instead of crossed in the aggressive posture he usually maintained. His compound eyes found Elena, and for a moment the massive warrior and the small human looked at each other. Elena smiled and waved, the same friendly wave she gave to everyone. Thraxul felt something in his chest constrict. She did not know what was about to happen. She had no idea that her soup had shattered 10,000 years of tradition. The delegates took their seats. The usual protocols began. But before plurality of 9 could start the formal proceedings, Thraxul stood and requested to speak first. I have an announcement, he said. His voice was steady, but inside every instinct told him to stop. To sit down, to be a proper warrior. But he had spent all night remembering what being a proper warrior had cost him. Had cost all of them. The room went silent. Even the translation system seemed to hold their breath. Yesterday, Thraxul began, Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth gave my warriors soup. Several delegates looked confused. What did soup have to do with military negotiations? It was a simple act. She was tired. She had made food for herself. She saw that my warriors had been standing for hours, and she offered to share. She did not ask for anything in return. She did not do it as a tactical maneuver. She did it because she thought we might be hungry. Elena was blushing now, embarrassed to be the center of attention. She had no idea where this was going. In that moment, Thraxul continued, I watched my warriors, the finest soldiers in the Dominion, break formation to accept food from a human. I was angry. I thought they had shown weakness. But last night I realized something. They had not shown weakness. They had shown that they were still capable of recognizing kindness. Chitara leaned forward, her antennae quivering with hope and confusion. The Craxian Dominion has existed for 10,000 years. We have conquered hundreds of worlds. We have the most powerful military in this region of space. We have fleets that can destroy planets. We are efficient. We are disciplined. We are strong, he paused. The room was absolutely silent. But we cannot make soup. A few delegates made sounds of confusion. What did soup have to do with anything? I do not mean we lack the technical ability, Thraxul said. I mean we have forgotten how to create something whose only purpose is to bring comfort. We eliminated that from our culture because we believed it was inefficiency. We believed that emotions were weakness. We believed that caring about others was a liability in a galaxy where strength is survival. Thraxul looked directly at Elena. But yesterday, Ambassador Vasquez showed me something I had not seen in my entire life. She showed me that caring for others is not weakness. It is the opposite. It is strength that we do not possess. She has a power that our entire empire cannot match, and she wields it without even knowing she is doing it. Elena looked like she wanted to hide under the table. This was not what she had expected when she brought soup to a diplomatic summit. Last night, Thraxul continued, I researched human culture extensively. I learned that humans make food for each other as an expression of care, that they spend time and resources on things that have no strategic value, that they help other species without demanding anything in return. And I realized that in 10,000 years of conquest, the Craxian Dominion has never once created anything as valuable as that soup. He turned to address the full assembly. We have taken worlds. We have built an empire, but we have not built anything worth having. We conquered because we could. Because we were strong, but strength without purpose is just violence with better organization. Several delegates were leaning forward now. This was unprecedented. Craxians did not speak like this. They certainly did not question their own culture in public. I declare before this assembly that the Craxian war fleet blockading the Verdant Rim will stand down. All 1,200 ships, effective immediately. The room exploded. Delegates jumped to their feet. Some shouted in joy, others in disbelief. Chitara made a sound that might have been crying or laughing or both. Elena dropped her ladle. Soup splashed on the floor. Thraxul raised one hand for silence. It took several minutes for the room to calm down. "This is not a military surrender," he said. "This is something different. This is an acknowledgement that we have been defeated, but not by weapons. We have been defeated by the recognition of what we have lost." He looked at his warriors. Many of them had their heads bowed. Some were shaking slightly. Craxians did not cry, but if they could have, Thraxul thought they might be crying now. For 10,000 years we have told ourselves that emotions are weakness, that caring for others is inefficiency, that strength is the only thing that matters in the universe. But Ambassador Vasquez proved that wrong with a simple act of kindness. She cared about whether we were comfortable. She cared about whether we were hungry. She cared about our well-being without knowing us, without us earning it, without strategic value. Thraxul turned to Elena directly. "Ambassador, you did not defeat us with superior tactics or weapons. You defeated us by showing us what we have become. We are strong enough to conquer worlds, but we are not strong enough to care about someone who is tired and hungry. That is not strength. That is just emptiness with power." Elena finally found her voice. "High Sovereign, I just brought soup. I was not trying to defeat anyone. I was not trying to make a political statement. I just thought people were hungry." "Yes," Thraxul said quietly. "That is exactly why you won. You were not trying to win. You were just trying to be kind, and we have no defense against that because we eliminated kindness from our culture so long ago that we forgot what it looked like." Plurality of 9 spread their wings. "High Sovereign Thraxul, are you saying that the Craxian Dominion will withdraw from the Verdant Rim territories entirely?" "Yes, we have no moral right to be there. We were going to take those worlds because we could, not because we should. The colonists of the Verdant Rim are peaceful people who grow food and raise families. They threatened no one. And we were going to destroy them for territory we do not need and resources we do not require." He looked around the room. "The Craxian Dominion will begin a period of reformation. We will examine our culture and our values. We will learn from species like humanity what it means to be strong enough to be gentle, and we formally request that Earth provide cultural liaisons to teach us what we have forgotten." Elena looked panicked. "Me? You want me to teach you?" "I am just a diplomat. I cook soup. I do not know how to reform an entire empire." "You already did," Thraxul said. "You did it with soup." The room erupted again, this time in celebration. Delegates were hugging each other. Chitara was definitely crying now. The crisis was over. The war was prevented. The Verdant Rim colonies were safe, and all because a tired human woman brought soup to a summit. Elena sat down heavily, still holding her ladle. This was impossible. This could not be happening. She had just made chicken soup from her grandmother's recipe. She had not tried to do anything except feed hungry people. But as she looked around the room at species celebrating peace, at Craxian warriors who were quietly holding empty soup bowls like they were precious artifacts, at Thraxul who stood tall but somehow looked lighter than before, she began to understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was the simplest thing. Care about someone else. Make them comfortable. Feed them when they are hungry, not because it serves a purpose. Not back 6 months later. Elena Vasquez stood in her small apartment on the diplomatic station and wondered how her life had become so strange. The apartment was crowded. 3 Craxian warriors filled most of the space, trying to learn how to chop vegetables without crushing them. Their massive hands were not designed for delicate work, but they were trying. Kelixer had accidentally destroyed 4 cutting boards before getting the hang of it. "Gently," Elena said for the 20th time. "You are dicing onions, not crushing enemies." "But it is an onion," Kelixar said, confused. "It cannot feel pain." No, but if you crush it too hard, it releases bitter compounds. You want to cut it cleanly. Like this. She demonstrated again, her knife moving smoothly through the onion. The Craxian warriors watched with the same intense focus they had once reserved for weapons training. In the past 6 months, Elena had taught this class 47 times. Every week, new Craxian warriors arrived at the diplomatic station, requesting cooking lessons from the human ambassador who had accidentally changed their civilization. It was exhausting. It was also the most important work she had ever done. The news networks across the galaxy had exploded after Thraxul's announcement. Some species celebrated. Others were suspicious, certain it was a trick. The Craxian High Command had been furious. They had sent messages demanding Thraxul return immediately for court-martial. He had refused. Instead, he had resigned his position and declared himself a student of human culture. 3,000 warriors from his fleet had followed him. They had decommissioned their ships and requested asylum on the diplomatic station. The remaining 9,000 warriors had returned to the Dominion. But they had carried stories with them. Stories about soup. Stories about a human woman who cared about strangers. Stories about what they had lost in 10,000 years of conquest. The Dominion was fracturing. Some clans wanted to continue the old ways. Others wanted reformation. There were protests. There were debates. For the first time in recorded Craxian history, warriors were questioning their orders and asking why they fought. It was messy. It was chaotic. But it was also beautiful in a way. A civilization was being reborn, and it had started with soup. Elena's terminal chimed. Another request for cooking classes. This time from a delegation of Craxian civilians who had never left their homeworld before. They wanted to learn about comfort food and hospitality. She accepted the request and added them to her waiting list. It was now 3 months long. Ambassador Vasquez, Thrixala said from across the kitchen. The old warrior was stirring a pot of broth with intense concentration. I have a question. Yes? Why do humans put so much time into food? From a pure efficiency standpoint, nutrition paste provides the same fuel in less time. Elena had been asked this question at least 100 times. She tried to find new ways to explain it each time. Because eating is not just about fuel, she said. It is about connection. When you cook for someone, you are saying, I care about you. Your happiness matters to me. I want you to feel good. And when someone cooks for you, you feel valued. You feel like you matter to someone. But you cooked for us when we were strangers. We had not earned your care. That is the point. You do not have to earn basic kindness. You deserve it just because you exist. The Craxian warriors were silent, absorbing this. It was still a radical concept for them. In their culture, everything had to be earned through strength and service. The idea that someone could deserve care simply for existing was revolutionary. Kelxar carefully placed his chopped onions in the pot. They were uneven, but he had not crushed a single one. Progress. On my homeworld, he said quietly. My birth mother was punished for spending extra time preparing my nutrition paste when I was young. She added something to make it taste better. I do not remember what. But I remember the taste, and I remember how it made me feel. How did it make you feel? Elena asked gently. Loved, Kelxar said. The word was awkward in his language. The Craxians were still developing vocabulary for emotions they had suppressed for millennia. I did not have a word for it then. But now I understand. She was trying to show me she cared even though it was forbidden. What happened to her? She was sent to a labor colony for inefficiency. I never saw her again. I was 5 years old. Elena's heart broke. She walked over and put her hand on Kelxar's arm. He flinched at first, not from pain but from unfamiliarity with gentle touch. Then he relaxed. I am sorry that happened to you, she said. It was normal for our culture. I did not question it until I tasted your soup. Then I remembered her, and I realized that what they called weakness was actually love. They took her from me because she loved me too much. Thrixala set down her spoon. There are millions of stories like that. Millions of Craxians who had family members disappeared for showing affection, for spending extra time on care tasks, for putting compassion above efficiency. We built an empire on the graves of everyone who tried to be kind. The room was quiet except for the bubbling of the pots on the stove. But now we are learning, Thrixala continued, slowly. It is hard to unlearn 10,000 years of training. But we are trying. And it started because you made soup. Elena shook her head. I did not do anything special. I just made food. That is what makes it special, a deep voice said from the doorway. Thraxul entered the apartment. He had to duck to fit through the door. In the past 6 months, the former High Sovereign had transformed. He still wore some military decorations, but he had added something new. A small cloth apron with flowers embroidered on it. It looked absurd on a massive warrior, but he wore it with dignity. I have news, Thraxul announced. The Dominion Council has voted. They are implementing the Reformation protocols. Mandatory cultural education for all warriors, cooking classes in military academies, art and music programs. They are even redesigning the nutrition paste facilities to grow real food. The Craxian students cheered, which was a strange sound coming from warriors. They had learned to express joy in the past 6 months. There is more, Thraxul said. They are establishing a new position, the Cultural Liaison Corps. They want warriors who understand both the old ways and the new ways to help with the transition. They asked if our group would consider returning to help. The room went silent. Returning to the Dominion meant leaving the safety of the diplomatic station. It meant facing warriors who still believed emotions were weakness. It could be dangerous, I will go, Kelixar said immediately. My birth mother sacrificed everything to show me love. The least I can do is try to build a world where that is not considered a crime. One by one, the others agreed. They would return. They would teach. They would help their civilization remember how to care. Thraxul looked at Elena. Will you come with us? As an advisor? You could continue teaching, but on a larger scale. We need someone who understands kindness instinctively, not just intellectually. Elena hesitated. Earth wanted her back. They wanted to debrief her. They wanted to understand how she had accidentally become the most influential human in galactic politics. But she looked at these warriors who were learning to chop onions without crushing them, who were learning that strength could be gentle, and she knew her answer. Yes, I will come, but I have conditions. Name them. First, I am not a symbol. I am just a person who cooks. Treat me like a person, not a legend. Agreed. Second, you have to let me teach civilians too, not just warriors. If this is going to work, it cannot just be the military changing. It has to be everyone. Already planned. The council specifically requested civilian programs. And third, Elena said, stirring one of the pots, you have to promise that no one will ever be punished for showing love again. Not for cooking, not for art, not for caring too much. That has to end. Thraxul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I cannot promise that will never happen. There are still traditionalists who resist change. But I can promise we will fight to make it happen. And I can promise that I will personally defend anyone who is punished for kindness. It was not a perfect answer, but it was honest. Elena respected that. Then I will come. The Craxian students celebrated again. They had finished their soup, a simple vegetable broth with noodles. It was not perfect. Some pieces were too big, others too small. But they had made it themselves with their own hands with the intention of nourishing others. They poured bowls and sat together on the floor, the apartment not having furniture large enough for Craxians. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, discussing the flavors. Elena watched them and felt something warm in her chest. This was what her grandmother had taught her. Food was not just nutrition. It was connection. It was care. It was love made tangible. And these warriors who had spent their entire lives learning to destroy were now learning to create. They were learning that the strongest thing they could do was care for someone else. 3 months later, Elena stood in a large auditorium on the Craxian homeworld. 5,000 warriors filled the seats, silent and attentive. This was her first public lecture in the Dominion. She was terrified, but she stepped up to the podium, and she began to speak. My name is Elena Vasquez.